So good afternoon, greetings, ladies and gentlemen. You're so welcome at Ukrainian Crisis Media Center, the expert discussion, Ukraine and Czech electoral discourse, trends and challenges. So the topic of today's discussion will cover the key anti-Ukrainian messages and narratives that could have been heard during the electoral campaign in Czech Republic. In 2025, we'll also discuss the role of social media in electoral processes that we've observed in Czech Republic, and also we'll focus on how can we communicate effectively about Ukraine, Russian-Ukrainian war, how can we communicate it to Czech people, and we will try to foresee how shall our bilateral relations develop after the election that we had in October in Czech Republic, this October. So, who will be our speakers today? Michal Lebduška, he is the AMO researcher from Czech Republic. Michal Beneš, ATOM Association. Ján Michalčák will be with us, expert on international security, so the former head of hybrid threat countering, Ministry of Defense of Czech Republic, Natalia Agarkova, founder and editor-in-chief of ProUkrainu. It's a Czech portal which actually presents what is happening in Ukraine and the situation with Ukrainians in Czech Republic, and Lenka Struzinska. Lenka Struzinska, independent disinformation researcher. So thank you, colleagues, for joining us also online. And today in the press center, we also have with us Yevhen Mahda, director of the Institute of the World Policy, Vladislav Mashkivsky, junior researcher of Europa program of Adastra Analytical Center, and also Mikita Kuzmenko, analyst of the group of analyzing the hybrid threats. I will moderate this discussion with Solovyan, head of hybrid threat analysis group of UCMC. So, okay, we're starting with a presentation that we've prepared. We'll start it now, and it actually is based on the survey that was published on our website today, on UCMC website. So if you'd like to dig deep into details and our accomplishments and results, so if you want to track which narratives were widespread, what was spreading about Ukraine during the Czech electoral campaign, so you can actually visit our website. You're welcome. And we're coming specifically to the presentation now. Okay. So I would love to start with the characteristics of the general trends, social trends observed in Czech society, because electoral campaign is, let's say, a sort of a response to those requests shaped by the society, and they resonate. The messages that we've heard during the electoral campaign resonate somehow with the attitudes dominating in the society. And as a foundation, we took the STEM survey from June 2025 that actually confirms that the typical thing, the specific question on supporting Ukraine with military aid by the Czech Republic. So how would you assess the military aid that the Czech Republic is providing to Ukraine? Almost 50% of people believe that Czech is helping Ukraine too much, too hard, let's say, that the help is too intense. And it's Czech Republic actually plays one of the most important roles in supporting us with the military aid, with the ammo, and it gave us a chance within the last year actually somehow to minimize the gap. Currently, the artillery ammo amount, we have much more of that to actually resist the Russian occupiers more effectively. I would like to draw your attention to another questions as well of the survey from STEM. Okay. The so-called artificial origin of Ukrainian borders. And with this question, one-third, unfortunately, approximately one-third of people, 29%, to be clear, of Czech citizens say that they either completely agree that Ukraine is an artificial country or partially agree that Ukrainian borders, internationally recognized from 1991, are artificial, like are not authentic. So These questions show us that there is quite a substantial electoral scope where misinformation or Russian propaganda narratives can actually spread. And those political parties, which electoral content we're analyzing in the survey, they were actually satisfying that demand with this content. So they were acting within this electoral field. So the very first topic that we focus attention on is, of course, Ukrainians in Czech Republic. As we know, approximately 380,000 Ukrainians are currently found shelter. They were fleeing from the war and they fled to Czech Republic respectively. So we can see that SPD example. We can characterize this political party or political movement as right-wing populists, and in their campaign they were stressing and underlining all the time that Czech Republic is helping Ukraine too intensely with finances and at the expense of Czech citizens. That's what they were telling. But in our discussion later during this event, we will, of course, talk about Ukrainians in Czech Republic. I think that Natalia Agarkova will give some details in her presentation. I will not, of course, stop at that now. Second, manipulation with the very topic of war, with the fear of war with Russia. This is something typical for Czech election, and we've monitored similar intentions in Moldovan electoral campaign, also in Romania. Active right-wing populists, just like left-wing, they actually use this statement that the current course of these countries they've taken to support Ukraine, sooner or later there will be confrontation with Moscow. And just we can see the SPD electoral content and adjacent parties, because I would like to remind you that at the beginning of March, they've established a right-wing coalition, apart from SPD, that has become the key party with the smaller right-wing parties on the list, like Svobodny, Pro, and Tricolora. So we can see, that this is their typical style. This is something typical for them. They were acting like one power, so they were spreading this on social media and accounts of all the four parties. These were quite unified, and in fact, demonstrating that this political electoral campaign had been coordinated from one center. And I think that those experts that were polishing the style, I guess these were the same people handling all of them, because they were in one list, basically. Okay, what was typical for that as well? Of course, judging pro-European course of Ukraine in the context that a lot of attention was paid to criticizing that, saying that Ukraine cannot and not capable of becoming the EU member state, in the opinion of Czech right-wing parties. And we can see a typical example where they were spreading the results of voting of Czech European Parliament MPs on Ukrainian resolutions. We can see the representative of the party, Svobodny, Libor Vandarchuk, actually positively speaks of the SPD party representative, that he voted against pro-Ukrainian resolutions. So on this slide, we actually can see the screenshots from TikTok, because we know that all the parties were actively using, especially the leaders of parties were actively integrating into TikTok. But honestly, based on specific indicators, this is not the dominating social platform, of course, but we'll dig deeper. We'll talk about that later. We'll talk to our Czech colleagues. Yes. If TikTok platform played some crucial role in the results of electoral campaign. But we've seen some attempts to use that social platform to spread messages discrediting Ukrainian managers, Ukrainian leaders. For example, pro-party leader Indra Hreidel, he reacted to the statements of Hungarian MFA on this episode of where the Hungarian citizen was mobilized, and then we later realized this was a Ukrainian citizen from Zakarpattia, and this person died eventually in the process. But as the investigation showed, it basically had no direct relation to the mobilization attempts. But still, the official, Budapest used this case to somehow generate anti-Ukrainian hysteria. And Reichel is actually accusing Ukraine of selective attitude to Hungarians and is pushing the statement that, look, think anyone could have been there instead of the Hungarian guy, any Czech man. So he says that it would be better to terminate any support for Ukraine because Ukraine is not sticking to European rules. Human rights are not respected in Ukraine. That this is against European values and so on. We can see the examples of the left-wing party Stacheva. Stacheva meaning that's enough, yeah. It's translated like that. So with these screenshots from TikTok as well, the party TikTok, we can see that the leader, Katarzyna Konechna, this lady was actively expressing statements that Ukraine is a corrupted state, that we are close to collapse, and she was criticizing Fiala's government for providing financial aid to Ukraine. As she said, this is a highly corrupted country, and the funds are just coming to the pockets of Zelensky. So, we also note some coincidences in the rhetorics of right-wing and left-wing. So, this is the example of accusing this practice of Ukrainian symbols and banners and flags to be put on state institutions in Czech Republic. On these screenshots, you can actually see what are the examples, like the statements from SPD leader Tomio Kamura and the spokesperson of Stacheva party. These are the same messages that after they get the power, these parties will just stop that practice with the symbols. Okay, and just to finish with this, the role of TikTok in Czech electoral campaign. So we've picked those Telegram channels, which are purely anti-Ukrainian with the narratives, and they use Czech language. So we can see that the largest TG channels have max 33,000 of subscribers, not very much. According to the latest data, approximately 1 million active users in Telegram we have in Czech Republic. So then in quantitative aspect, these TG channels are not dominating. If we take the supporters of each post, well, the actual picture looks like that the active users who are supporting pro-Russian TG channels is quite low still. Approximately just like several thousands maybe of people. These are quite marginal numbers compared to, of course, the general electoral context of Ukraine, let's say. So I would love I'd like to say that the actual numbers that tell us that 1 million active TG users we have in Czech Republic, compared to those numbers, it tells us that the key audience, of course, these are people from Ukraine, Belarus, and some part of the audience, Russian-speaking audience, and they automatically fall into the scope of Russian-speaking TG channels, and Russia has some tools for direct impact on those citizens who may be dissatisfied with their social stance, economic capacity in Czech Republic, and potentially it may it tells us that Russia is trying to let's say, attract various potential saboteurs even. So when we come when we return to analysis of pro-Russian TG channels in Czech Republic, we can see that their activity, it's mostly about spreading these statements given by Russian representatives and their narratives, and launching these small campaigns to discredit pro-Ukrainian subjects. One of the last campaigns like that is criticizing the initiative to fundraise for production of Ukrainian missile by Czech citizens, the one that may hit Moscow. The key statement that was given by pro-Russian actors, well, they were criticizing this initiative because, in their opinion, that's how Czech Republic can actually make Russia angry, and there will be a direct response from Russia to that. Okay, so I would love to stop at this. This is our presentation that we've prepared on this survey regarding Stacheva and SPD within the recent electoral campaign. And now I would love to step into the discussion and engage Michal Lebduška, invite him to discussion. Okay, let's talk about general trends that we could have been observing in Czech electoral campaign in October. And in your opinion, how shall in future we shape the bilateral Czech-Ukrainian relations? Because now in Prague we have the power shift. Thank you.
Dobrého dňa, ďakujem.
Good afternoon, thank you. So, my Czech colleagues, I'm so sorry, but our key audience now, of course, is Ukrainian speaking. Therefore, I will use Ukrainian, if, of course, it's possible. So please don't be offended, dear Czech colleagues. I would like, first of all, to draw attention to the following. During your presentation, you told us about two parties. Let's say about coalition you spoke, because this is truly not one political party that was in the list, in these lists, let's say. SPD, the right wing, radical right wing, and the radical left wing. The coalition, where we have the Communist Party, a Czech Communist Party. What should I say primarily to you? That first of all, yes, these are quite marginal. And if we look at the results of the election, yes, the coalition did not become a part of the parliament. It didn't step into parliament, and SPD, they didn't get great results eventually. Less than 0.8% of the votes, therefore less than 8% of the votes. So their stance is quite weak. So first of all, we have to consider the rhetorics first, and what the hegemon is doing in Czech Republic. Andrej Babiš, yes, one who will become a prime minister. His party, ANO, that is the winner, let's say, of the electoral process. And in this anti-Ukrainian rhetorics is very typical for them as well, at some extent. So what should we pay attention to? It seems to me that this is the most important thing. That apart from these radical parties in Czech Republic, we have, if we talk about the parties that won the election and entered the coalition, the governmental coalition, we have parties which were systemically pro-Russian or anti-Ukrainian, let's say, yeah? Honestly, first of all, Andrej Babiš, who will be our future prime minister. This is like a public issue that it wasn't actually a basis of their campaign, but these issues were discussed all the time and thrown in informational space. Due to some economic reasons, let's say. One important thing should be mentioned for the context. In Czech Republic, what was the most important in the electoral campaign was the economy and economic aspects, yes? Because in Czech Republic, since 2019, after the COVID, there was quite a powerful economic crisis, and the government couldn't tackle that. The government that is finalizing its convocation now, they couldn't tackle it. And only in 2025, the real salaries started growing compared to 2019. So this is still a problem, of course. And it's also related to anti-Ukrainian rhetorics of specifically Andrej Babiš and many other parties. Due to this crisis, of course, we need to help the Czech citizens, as they say, and not spending money elsewhere, not sending it to Ukraine, as they say, because we have the crisis. So this was the rhetorics they used, more or less. But what I told you, for Andrej Babiš, it's quite typical, It's important to understand. We can later talk also about that a little bit in details. I don't want to steal time, a lot of time. Also, I will briefly tell you what situation may be there after the election. How will the coalition look like, and the relations with Ukraine? So primarily, it's highly likely that we will have the coalition led by ANO party of Andrej Babiš. This will be like the core coalition party, and we will have, of course, in the coalition, Automobilisty dla sebe. This is the right-wing party with some specific trends, but they're, let's say, quite moderate. SPD will be the third one. So the radical right wing. As I told you, they had a very bad result. So their stance in the coalition will be really weak. And we already know that from SPD, the members of the government, well, Andrej Babiš is selecting them. He will have his people, let's say, at the table, so it's really important. When it comes to the policy in Ukraine, well, let's say Ukrainian policy, for Andrej Babiš, it would be the best if it never existed, this issue, because he's not interested. It's not his priority at all. He would like that to vanish somehow, from the agenda. He's definitely not pro-Russian. He's not anti-Ukrainian, let's say, but he has other priorities. So it seems to me that what can change? Czech politicians will not be as active as they used to be. This is the most important thing. And of course, it covers such areas as support provided to Ukraine, financial support specifically, Ukraine's recovery. We already know that in the end of 2025, so Mr. Tomáš, who is the governmental commissioner in Ukraine's recovery, so he will be dismissed from this position, and This is quite a huge issue. This is something that was in the electoral campaign. Was the initiative of the Czech government, but there are a couple of things to mention. First, financial support of the previous government, let's say. Officially, this government is still, de facto it's still there in the euro. This support was still not so substantial. So nothing will really change in the Czech policy towards Ukraine. We'll see how it will look like. Because it's about our President Petr Pavel, his role is important here as well. He is the important player. He will push this initiative forward. In order that Andrej Babiš doesn't have the problem with the initiative itself. Michal Starnat, the richest Czech citizen, is getting a lot of money thanks to this, who is the owner of this Czechoslovak group. So this is the defense holding, a private one. And this is what the barrier for Babiš, but not the initiative itself. I just have to underline that. Another important thing to say, the last thing for me. Babiš himself, from the very, very beginning, he started saying, I will not create barriers for Czech defense business to sell ammo for Ukraine, So nothing basically will change, And it seems to me that, at least currently, he will definitely not actively block it at European level, any resolutions or decisions that maybe touch upon sanctions against Russia. I think there will be no problems. The key change that may take place is that governmental policy will not be so active towards Ukraine. I think it's the most important message. And I stop at that. Thank you. Thank you so much, Michal, for detailed analysis. And you've explained us what is the landscape of changes and trends in Czech policy now. What can potentially shape the future bilateral relations. So let's get a comment from Ukrainian side now, okay? Ukrainian expert committee, how do we evaluate the results, assess the results of election, okay? Just to understand, if Ukraine is ready to pragmatize, let's say, relations with their partners among Visegrad 4, including Czech Republic, if we are ready to these changes, we'll still have these changes ongoing in other electoral campaign, maybe not Czech Republic, but also Poland will be there in Hungary. Hungary will be an important issue for Ukraine in 2026. We understand why, because we're expecting for some Hungarian election as well. Quite important for Ukraine. Speaking of future power shifts in Hungary, Yevhen, how do you think? Is Ukraine ready for those trends? Are we doing enough in informational environment, to actually retain our partners and allies as close as we can, and keep the support? So good afternoon. Thank you. First of all, we have to say that the Andrej Babiš Ano party's triumph, let's say, it wasn't a surprise or secret for anyone. So this was quite obvious. It was expected. It was foreseen because Russian-Ukrainian war as well. Everything raised. All the prices went up, the credit rates. So it affected financially Czech citizens. Let's not think that Russian propaganda is just pushing only Putin's splendor in the countries. No. After the Prague riot of 1945 and Prague Spring in 1968, in Czech Republic, it cannot be sold. I'm so sorry. By the way, I would like to congratulate our Czech and Slovak friends with the anniversary of Czechoslovakia announcement that they had yesterday. In Czech Republic especially. So what I want to tell you, we have to avoid demonization of our potential partners, because Andrej Babiš, he is not Viktor Orban at all. He's not Robert Fico. Okay? It's not the same team. And there's another factor, that if the current president of Hungary or Slovakia, not everybody will even recall what one's name is. President Petr Pavel, on the one hand, he is really visible. Everybody knows who he is, and he's always different with his pragmatic assessments of the political and military situation. But what's not typical for Ukrainian society, he didn't take part in election directly. So this is the traditions that were laid by Václav Havel. And the very stance of Czech Republic, at some point, this is the Masaryk's heritage, Czechoslovakian heritage, which was always a democratic entity, you know, always has been. And an interwar period between two world wars as well. So what can we say? First of all, there is a powerful factor of Ukrainian refugees. As we heard, the number is approximately 400,000, yes? And we have to understand that Russian propaganda is doing it differently. They're doing it differently in countries where we have hundreds of thousands and where there are only thousands, okay? And even with huge resources, they spread it effectively still. For the countries of Central Europe, where the presence of our refugees, apart from Hungary maybe, is really, really high, they have the same narratives applied. Because of Ukrainians, you cannot go to a doctor. Because of Ukrainians, you cannot. Your children don't go to kindergartens or schools. These are all Ukrainians. Let's blame them. This is something very low level, you know, average level. You cannot think that average person in the Central Europe, average citizen, can fully grasp all this Russian narrative. No, they think about their own interests. They have their own interests and capacities. In Czech Republic specifically, by the way, there are so many local activists, a critical mass of local activists, and also critical mass of caring Ukrainian migrants who are trying. For example, there is Rostislav Prokopiuk, a man I know very well. He even launched a CSO Ukrainian Institute in Czech Republic. The same we have in Bratislava, by the way. Not the department of our MFA, but these are NGOs and CSOs promoting our interests, and we have to work with those. Based on what? Based on pragmatic approach. And I think that we as a state made a huge mistake when Robert Fico was elected. You remember that? We couldn't raise above the Slovak process, you know, at the level of Visegrad 4. So just saying that for us, saying what is beneficial for us in this specific case, it's not the transit, because Czech Republic has no borders with us, okay? First of all, Czech defense complex, okay? Czech defense enterprises. It's not just about stressing and underlining like how large scale the project is. This is Petr Pavel's contribution. Thanks to him, this million ammo units initiative, sorry for using this Soviet idiom, but Czech Republic pushed this European pride away because the European Union at that moment couldn't respond. They couldn't actually keep their promises, but Czechs did that. So it's not just about cooperation. We have to say how important it is to have Czech ammo, you know, where it's possible. We have to transfer Ukrainian expertise where it's useful. We have to interact in this aspect. And it's pretty obvious that there's another thing, which is for many Ukrainians will be quite invisible, something nobody's aware of. In Czech society, there is subconscious negative attitude towards Ukrainians that was actually laid during the Czechoslovak Soviet Republic, because Banderivci were shown as enemies of Czechs and Slovaks back then. So this was the part of socialist propaganda back then, many years ago, and they were making movies about that, you know. So this is definitely something that we got even in 1940s, 1950s. We are actually having this harvest now of the seeds they were sowing back then. Currently, they're shaping the modern political nation. If you want to talk to Mr. Akamura, who is truly a phenomenal politician, Japanese, Czech, or Czech Japanese, I don't know how to call him, because he has this right-wing stance. We have to counteract his narrative with underlining the essence of political Ukrainian nation, where we have ethnic Ukrainians finding their niche, Jews, ethnic Russians, whoever, representatives of dozens of nationalities that we have. So it seems to me that we should not put ash on our heads, you know, not put Czech beer on our heads as well over the ash, but we have to work even more than we do. Thank you so much, Yevhen. I think that it gives us a chance now to shape a vision, like how Ukraine should develop further relations with Visegrad 4 states. Because what we're witnessing, that populist trends are strengthening in politics, but also we have to understand what are the deep reasons, core reasons for it. Economy, culture, the rest of factors. And if we analyze it as experts, we should not give some polarized opinions, which will be barriers for us to find some understanding. Okay, I'd like to pass the floor to Ján Michalčák now and ask Ján, in his opinion, in your opinion, Ján, the current government, how did this government communicate? What communication was there from government's side regarding the support of Ukraine? And why did we observe the populist parties building their campaign partially on these critical anti-Ukrainian mottos, you know, and at the same time, the government couldn't stand stand for their stance, you know, and to support Ukraine, and it didn't give enough of dividends, political dividends, to eventually win the election. Thank you.
Much and good afternoon from Brussels. Unfortunately, I cannot grace you with my knowledge of Ukrainian as Michal Lebduška did. Hats off to him. So you will have to do with English. Sorry about that. But what I can say is Slava Ukraini. Glad to be here with you remotely. To answer your questions, I would first like to add to some of what the colleagues said before me. And I would like to begin with the polling results that I think Volodymyr mentioned in the presentation at the beginning, that a sizable portion of the population would like to see aid to Ukraine stop. I'm not questioning the results of the polling per se, but the numbers show more than anything that it really depends on how you phrase the question and how you ask the people. Because to give you another example, another poll done by the same agency actually asks people who they believe the biggest threat to Czechia is. And an overwhelming majority, around 70% of Czechs actually agree that it is Russia posing the biggest threat to society. So the two polling numbers seem to be contradictory, but I really don't think that there is any anti-Ukrainian sentiment in the majority of the Czech population. More likely it is first, how you phrase the question, and second, who succeeds in catering to objective fears and grievances that the population may have. And that also connects to what Michal said in his presentation about Czechia actually having become, and that's probably interesting and important for the international audience and for our Ukrainian friends as well, to realize that Czechia has actually become one of the most expensive countries to live in the entire EU and by extension Europe in general, compared to real wages. So long gone are the times where Prague and other cities in Czechia were, cheap for visitors to come. Large portions of the population really find it extremely difficult to survive because the costs are pretty much on par with Western capitals, so to speak, but the wages have remained very much Eastern European, to use that simplification. So, without question, there are people who genuinely find it difficult to have a decent living standard given the living situation and the wages at the wage level that hasn't really increased and in opposition has decreased due to COVID and due to the invasion itself and the extremely high energy prices, because another point is that Czechia has had the highest energy prices in the entire EU as well. So that just to add, and in that environment, as also Michal already pointed out, ANO, SPD, and even Stachilo played on those grievances and used them in the campaign. But as we've already seen, Babiš, more than anything, leads a catch-all party, and what that means is that he wants to attract voters of all different parties, including the more extreme voters who would have otherwise voted for the SPD or Stachilo. And in order for that to happen, he needed to toughen up his rhetoric, be more aggressive, in the hopes of that would lead to more people voting for him and not the SPD and Stachilo. Numbers show that this was successful because, as we already heard, both the SPD and Stachilo got much lower election results than was expected. For the SPD, it is the lowest election result in their history, the worst election result, and that was achieved by Babiš thanks to his election rhetoric being tough on Ukraine. But because he has no ideology, that doesn't mean that he can be compared to Orbán or Fico, as we've also heard. And that brings me to the current government and to your question, and that is the benefits that the Ukrainian refugees have already brought to the Czech economy. I don't want to go into too much detail, but just to keep it really brief, if anything, numbers show, at least for the past year, have shown that the Ukrainian population in Czechia has been a net benefit for our economy. We have, if we want to keep it, really cynical, we have earned money thanks to Ukrainian refugees being in Czechia, and our GDP has been growing also partly thanks to the Ukrainian population in Czechia. And that all in an environment where the country, Czechia, has had basically full employment. It is the country with the lowest unemployment rate in the EU, and that also means that there simply are job vacancies that need to be filled and are being filled by our Ukrainian friends who have found a second home in Czechia. And that is something that the current government, in my opinion, has completely neglected to mention in the election campaign. I'm not necessarily claiming that this would have won the election for the current government. I'm not an election strategist, so I wouldn't know. But just the fact that the numbers are there, that statisticians and journalists have dug up those numbers to show that, look, this is the net benefit. It is in the hundreds of millions of euros that we have earned, more than the economy has given the Ukrainian refugees in help, in subsidies. And that is simply a fact, but a fact that the government simply completely neglected, and it had to be the journalists who found out what the situation is. For example, using our law to free access to information. They've asked the statistical office to give them the latest data, which have proven that fact. And as I said, the current government didn't really mention it in the campaign at all. At the same time, the other camp, so to speak, parties like the SPD and Stachilo, have been playing the really cynical and full of disinformation note of, look, Ukrainians are coming here in their expensive cars from the so-called safe spaces in Ukraine, so they don't really need our help, and they're costing us money, which we all know is a complete lie, and it's not true. But we've still seen now freshly elected MPs for the SPD, for example, shooting videos where they literally went around streets of Czechia filming expensive-looking Ukrainian cars with Ukrainian plates, and showing, look, this plate is from the West, so they shouldn't really be here because, you know, the war is apparently only in the East, so, you know, why pay money? And that's something that, of course, is full of pro-Kremlin propaganda, but again, the government has completely neglected any attempt at actually disputing those claims. Of course, you could claim that you cannot really win a battle with people who firmly believe in pro-Kremlin disinformation or just build their business on spreading it, but you could have at least tried, and it could have hypothetically won you the 1, 2, 3% that would have enabled you to at least try and build a government after the election. The government hasn't tried, and that's the result. So that also means, I think, that the feeling is that the disinformation narratives are more prevalent than is the reality, because numbers show that a really tiny fraction of the Czech population actively believes pro-Kremlin propaganda, but those who spread it are so active and so vocal, for example, on social media, that they are easy to be seen, and the current government has, I think, failed in doing anything against that. And that brings me back to Babiš, and I'll stop there. He is really a transactionist because he has no real ideology. He knows that he needs to continue supporting Ukraine, you know, because he is really not interested in catering to pro-Russian propaganda personally. He just needed to win the votes, which he did. And if anything, if we want to stay cynical again, his businesses, don't forget Babiš is one of the wealthiest people in Czechia as well, all of his businesses are purely based in the west of Czechia, if we don't count Slovakia, of course. And that also means that he needs to keep the door to the west open. He needs to keep his friends in the west happy. And if not for any other reason, I firmly believe that Babiš will keep the aid to Ukraine flowing, but his rhetoric, which he needed to toughen up to get those votes, as I mentioned, that I think can be a vicious circle. It could be a trap for him, because the voters who voted for him instead of the SPD, for example, or Stachilo, I think might now expect Babiš to deliver on those promises, to deliver on his more aggressive rhetoric. So, you know, if anything, I think what could happen, what we could see happening is Babiš being more aggressive still for the public, but his deeds, I firmly believe, will basically keep, as Michal also pointed out, keep Czechia on the right track and keep us helping Ukraine as we have. Last point to the ammunition initiative. Again, Michal has explained it nicely. I would just add one point to it. If anything, it is Babiš's ego that has led him to sound more aggressive, more negative toward the ammunition initiative. Because as Michal has pointed out, Michal Strnad is the main beneficiary of the money flowing to the ammunition initiative, because he is the owner of the biggest Czech ammunition conglomerate. And for Babiš, that's also quite personal, because as sources close to Babiš have uncovered recently, the owner of the ammunition conglomerate, Michal Strnad, is quite young. He's freshly over 30, I think 31 or 32, and he has become, cynically, also thanks to the war against Ukraine, to the Russian war against Ukraine, the wealthiest person. And Babiš simply doesn't respect him, because in his eyes, he has built his own company from the ground up, whereas Strnad, in Babiš's eyes, has become wealthy thanks to a war, and also thanks to the fact that he has inherited his company from his own dad. So again, as sources confirm, this is the reason why Babiš is now reluctant to continue the ammunition initiative. But among others, Petr Pavel, the president, has been pushing Babiš to reconsider and has been trying to explain to Babiš that, look, if not anything else, there are business opportunities for the entire EU, for the country, and for you, maybe even, if we keep the aid flowing and if we don't stop. So to conclude, the underlying factors that I've explained may sound cynical, because they are to an extent, but the end result for Ukraine, I think, will be positive, because I don't see Babiš stopping the aid flowing. I don't see him reconsidering. We just have to get used to a new paradigm where Babiš, the new government, will be forced to be more aggressive. If not for anything else, it's because we have the SPD in government, most likely. But, if we think about it, even Okamura, the SPD leader, is a transactionist. He doesn't really believe the things he says. He's built his empire, his political empire, his parties, on being aggressive, on being sometimes xenophobic and anti-Ukraine. But personally, if we look at Okamura's history, he was really liberal. He was advocating accepting migrants some 20 years back into Czechia. That you can still look up interviews with Okamura himself saying that migrants in Czechia are a net benefit and that we need them. But then suddenly he realized that in this populist wave, the way to succeed politically is to change sides and appear more aggressive. But I think in his core, he really doesn't care about Ukraine or anything else, which again is cynical, but will be a net positive for all of us. So that's for me. I really think that nothing substantially negative will come out of this election. And the best thing we all should be thankful for is that Stachilo didn't make it in, because if anything, Stachilo is the pro-Kremlin propaganda machine in Czechia. They are basically the Communist Party who have been pro-Kremlin forever. So the fact that they are not there is the thing that we should be thankful for. And there are positive things in the future, I believe.
Thanks so much for your in-depth analysis and these positive conclusions, I suppose. So now I'd like to give floors to Lenka Struzinska and ask her view regarding recent elections and maybe some novelty within Russian disinformation, whether it was a direct impact or we may consume only about topics which are related with local interests, a local agenda, and there were no direct impact by Russians during the elections.
Okay. Hi everyone. Thank you for me being here. I would start with your question, and then I would really like to react on my colleagues in here. So, in overall, I was expecting bigger show for those elections in Czech Republic. Definitely in comparison with the elections in Moldova, the narratives definitely weren't so aggressive, and they were not, let's say, so untruthful. That is caused because in Czech Republic we already have cases when people are actually trialed for false information spreading on social media. So people are very careful about what they are putting out there. However, and now I will a little bit continue on what my colleague said in here. It's true that the current government was not focusing very much on the internal issues. And therefore it kind of created the environment for the disinformation actors to say we were focusing too much on Ukraine or outside issues. We have a lot of people in here in the economic crisis, the energy prices are high. And as a scapegoat, we chose to put that on the Ukrainian refugees. So, everything's expensive because of the Ukraine refugees, and we don't have jobs because of the Ukraine refugees. Specifically regarding the elections, there are two narratives which I would like to share, which were quite interesting, actually. The first one was quite popular on Facebook, saying that the Ukraine refugees who are currently in Czech Republic were getting Czech citizenship with the purpose for them to vote the right parties in the elections, meaning the still current governmental parties. And the next narrative was that the young Ukrainian boys, which were now allowed to go abroad from Ukraine, were purposefully sent to the Western countries to then be mobilized and ignite rebellions within the countries and slowly take over the country itself. That was, I think, the most ridiculous but very popular narratives within the Czech space. Now, for me reacting on my colleagues directly, government parties did not inform about the good things which happened due to the Ukrainian refugees be here, meaning, as you said, Mr. Michalčák, to have enough money in here. But I think they kind of did. I have to disagree with that statement. They did use that within the campaign. Unfortunately, they used that within the campaign for the last 2 months. The problem is, and that's what you said, the problem is that they did not inform about that regularly for the past 3 years. And within the disinformation actors who were feeding their audience for past decades about ridiculous statements, telling the truth and using the strategic communication from the government about why is it good that we have the Ukrainian friends in here, it's not gonna change anything for the past 2 months. Okay, they were supposed to work on that much longer. And I would not be so optimistic about Andrej Babiš, actually. I definitely agree that he's a businessman, and therefore, within the before the election, he would promise everything just to steal the voters from the radicalized parties, as you said. It's true that he would do everything what is good for business. We can maybe remember that when he was prime minister before, we had the whole scandal about the Verbětice, and he had to kick out Russian diplomats from Prague. If he wouldn't, that would be a political suicide for him. And it's clear that Russians did not like him for that very much, but he did that because it was good for business, right? However, when you have a look on the current discussions about building the government, you can see what kind of ministries him and the party ANO is focusing on. It's the ministries which would be good for his agro business. He doesn't care about the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or Interior, which is kind of scary. Please also don't forget that the trial with him should be soon. The court already asked for him and his political immunity to be taken down, and that should be decided within the next few months. Now, that gives the parties like SPD and Motoriste kind of, gun in their hand on Babiš, saying like, hey, if you're not gonna give us the Ministry of Interior, we will take your immunity down and you will go to court. So this is like probably the worst scenario, right? But I would just not forget that it's not gonna be so easy. And that's probably all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thanks for these takes, and now maybe I will give the floors to Ján. maybe he would like to respond because Lenka mentioned you. So please, just
Thank you.
in a few minutes, if it is possible.
Sure. No, thank you. I will be really quick because I really don't think there is any disagreement between me and Lenka. As she herself said, what she pointed out was basically the worst possible scenario, and so we can only hope. It is true that in the coalition building now, the SPD and the motorists have a strong negotiation tactic point, because really, if they don't vote for Babish's immunity to be preserved, or conversely lifted, then Babiš goes to court, so that they can basically blackmail him. But I don't. Let's see what happens. We cannot forget that Petr Pavel, the president, will still have a strong say in the process. The point that ANO doesn't really care about ministries such as the foreign ministry or the interior, that is partly true, but also because Babiš wants to steer foreign policy through the office of the government and basically steer it himself, and he doesn't see the foreign ministry as important for him. And also the president, I think, keeping strong links to the West is of paramount importance. I think for Babiš, it's mainly because of his business and also good relations with people like Macron, who he likes very much. For Pavel, it's more about our anchors in the Western structures, such as the EU and NATO. And just breaking news from a few minutes back, it seems that Babiš will nominate a person that is really controversial for the foreign ministry, even though this person has had a number of scandals. Let's not go into detail, but it is very likely, if it really happens in a few days' time, that the president will disagree with the nomination, which is a borderline case, because some constitutional lawyers claim that the president doesn't have a power to refuse a candidate for a ministry, but it will most likely happen if the news is correct. So we are in for a really interesting period, but still, even Babiš has firmly ruled out any discussion about our EU/NATO membership, and even he has softened his rhetoric on Ukraine since the election. So it's unfortunately for us, what sources say about Babiš is that he's really similar to Donald Trump in the US, in that he is of the opinion of the person he last spoke to. So if that is correct, we must only hope that he speaks to the West a lot of times, and also to President Zelensky, and that, by the way, the two already had a phone call right after the election, and even Babiš says that the phone call was really constructive, and that he's planning to visit Kiev in a short time. So of course, depends on how optimistic you want to be. There's so many pessimistic things that I've chosen the more optimistic route, but we will only need to wait and see.
Thanks so much. And now I'd like, of course, we will focus and follow developments regarding forming the new government in the Czech Republic. But now I'd like to little bit shift our discussion towards the topic of social media and its role regarding electoral process in Czech Republic. So now I'd like to give floors to Michal Beneš and ask his point of view regarding how social media inflected and what the impact was on the results, and maybe some kind of trends and developments we may forecast in this regard. Please.
Okay, thank you so much. I'll also do it in English because I unfortunately do not speak Ukrainian, but good afternoon. First, because this is mainly about Ukraine, I'll basically start with the topics that were resonating in regards to Ukraine a lot during the elections and in the months leading to the elections. So The first of the main themes were that Ukraine was a provocateur, which is something we have seen here since the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and the classic narratives that the Ukraine wants to drag Europe into war, or total disinformation, like for instance that the drone that landed in Poland was Ukrainian and it was done on purpose by Ukraine to drag NATO into the war, and Russia can use it then as a narrative for that. Also, another narrative is that Ukraine is rejecting peace, and basically all of the diplomatic initiatives that were, or initiatives, I'll say with asterisks, that were initiated by Russia were a huge Russian success, while it was a massive Ukrainian failure. And this actually serves as sort of a bone that you can throw the pro-peace factions that we have also in the Czech Republic, because whenever during the elections there was mentioned that Ukraine is dragging Europe and Czechia as a result to the war, there's always the subsequent narrative of we are for peace, which was actually mentioned by Babiš himself, by people from ANO, and not just in this election, but actually if you look at the presidential election that Babiš lost against current President Petr Pavel, there were questions where actually journalists asked him directly, would you support a NATO ally if he was attacked? And he didn't say yes, he didn't say no, but he was unable to give an answer. And there was this one very funny moment in one of the political discussions where Petr Pavel actually gave him a framed Article 5 of NATO. So this pro-peace narrative is actually very common. I'm also very glad that the Stachilo, the communists, didn't make it, because they were one of the main leaders of this pro-peace narrative. And actually their target group, which is mainly older people or mainly people with the high school or grammar school education, are actually following them. Also, another theme that we can see here is that was already mentioned here by my colleagues, that the Czech state is prioritizing refugees over citizens. And this is explained, for instance, like, hey, pensioners have very low wages. So Ján mentioned here that Czech wages compared to the cost of living are very Eastern European, and with pensions it's the same, if not even worse. It's really a problem. And as a result, these people that are in the pension age actually suffer the most from the spikes in energy prices, in the rising prices of food. And as a result, they are more inclined to actually vote parties like Stachilo. And also, one of these economic narratives is that the Czech state is actually bankrupting itself with supporting Ukraine, that we're sending money that were supposed to be used for like pensions, and we buy tanks for Ukraine, which is actually not true. And I'm glad the munition initiative was mentioned here, because it's very interesting if we follow what Andrej Babiš and other people from the motorists, Stachilo and SPD said before the elections. And they mentioned that we are definitely going to cancel the munition initiative and we're going to put it under NATO, which actually NATO doesn't have the proper tools for that. But aside, this narrative has completely changed after ANO and SPD and motorists actually are now forming the government for the next coalition, for two reasons. First one, that the president, Petr Pavel, basically, he really stressed that this is extremely important topic for him, and he's going to make problems for Andrej Babiš if he's not going to keep the initiative. And second, there's actually a massive push from Michal Czechoslovak Group and other industry defense associations to actually keep the initiative, because I think, I don't know if Babiš didn't know it or he just ignored the fact, but the munition initiative is actually a net contributor to the Czech budget, because all of these purchases of ammunition that are happening through Czech Republic as a coordinator are actually taxed in the Czech Republic. So it's bringing billions of Czech crowns, if not euros, to the Czech budget. And Babiš now realized it. And since he is so pro-business, I think he realized it would be very hard for him to explain to the public how, while he's pro-business, he's actually not supporting business in this way. And lastly, in the narratives, what we could have seen resonating around the social media, especially in the summer, was that there was some historical revisionist ideas floating around that were basically supposed to alienate portions of the Czech population towards Ukraine, by mentioning, for instance, that during the occupation of Czechoslovakia by Soviet Union in 1968, most of the people high up in the echelons of power in the Soviet political sphere were Ukrainians, like Brezhnev, Podgorny, and so on. So this is also like one of the basically narratives that's floating around. And to get to the second part of the question about how it was actually during the elections. So during the elections, we could have seen the classic Russian disinformation machinery at work. So if you would randomly just open a Facebook post of any kind of government minister or ministry or politician or candidate, you could see that like first 5 to 15 posts were people who, if you clicked on them, they didn't have a profile picture, they didn't have any friends, they had locked profiles, or they had just like 5 friends. It was all really sketchy. They had foreign names, but they are super fluent in Czech. And they were all extremely aggressive towards whatever the government said. It doesn't matter if it was about, we're going to increase the pensions, we're going to increase the aid to Ukraine, we're going to fix the roads. It doesn't matter. They always found a way to spin it around that it's the Ukraine's fault. Russia is great. We should really make a small revolution here in these elections and so on. And it was massively supported by bots. So whenever a post was published in like first 5-10 minutes, it always had like 1,000 likes, which just put it to the top of the agenda of everyone when they were reading the commentaries. And when you actually read the same posts now after the election, the amount of this has significantly decreased. And also, the problem is that a lot of it we do not see. So on Facebook, you can easily open this, you can cross-check it, and you can identify. But what is a real problem, I think, is TikTok, because not just in regards to the Russian disinformation campaigns, but also Chinese disinformation campaigns, which have different goals, but I'll not go into detail now since we're talking about Russia and Ukraine. But back to TikTok. TikTok in Czechia is used by 3 to 4 million Czechs that are using it at least once a week. And if we go into the age group of like under 30, under 20, 28, I don't know, like 60%, 50% of people are actually using it. And what's most shocking is that in the age group of, I think, 26 and below, 40% of people who actively use TikTok in Czech Republic use it as their only, I'll stress it again, only source of the information and news. So whatever they see on TikTok, that's reinforced through viewing the same or similar content again and again and again. And we know from the past that China, for instance, is very good at merging or blending this content with something that looks very harmless, like education videos or cooking videos and so on. And there's also the Romanian scenario, because in Romania it came out of the blue. Then Georgescu was first. The Constitutional Court had to cancel the election. So we were actually really afraid that in Czech Republic is gonna be similar, and intelligence agencies and other actors like the Cybersecurity and Information Office of the Czech Republic have been warning that the amount of fake accounts on TikTok is actually massively increasing ahead of the election. So that was actually one of the other problems. We cannot for sure say at the moment what or how big of an effect it had on the result of the election, but I personally would say that if you look at the disposition of votes after the election, this campaign has not worked too great, because the communists, which probably would have been the main beneficiary of this, are out of the parliament for the second term in a row. SPD is seriously weakened. And then we have the new party, motorists. But I think motorists, they're also not too dangerous because, same as Babiš, they do not have any ideology. I think they also do not know what they want. So they're basically sort of going with whatever Andrej Babiš is saying, and they just care about the posts they're gonna get, the post of influence. So it's really hard to see. And to just wrap it up, what's actually really funny is that in Czech Republic we have this huge discrepancy between what on one side civil society and certain government institutions are doing. By government institutions, I mean the bureaucrats, because we have extremely capable cyber and information security office. We have very capable intelligence agencies. Both of these institutions are actually consistently warning in their basically press releases and in their yearly statements that these things are threats and they need to be addressed. We also have very strong civil society. We have one NGO that's called Czech Elves, which sounds a bit funny, but it's actually an NGO made of security analysts, former people from the military, people from the government, people from the civil society, that are consistently tracking the information and cyber narratives that are happening online. And on the other side, you have the people from the government. I will give an example. 2 weeks ago, I have been on an event where there was a lot of people from the government, and there was a question: what is the strategy of the upcoming Andrej Babiš Czech government in terms of information and hybrid warfare threats? And the answer to the question was, upcoming people from the government do not even know what these terms mean. So that's about it. And Andrej Babiš himself said that I'm gonna seriously cut funding to strategic communication, Stratcom offices across the government. Just few days ago, the government coordinator for strategic communication, which was actually extremely respected across the field, quit, and Babiš is probably going to cancel his position or defund it. And I think that's the main problem. And just my very last point is that in Czech Republic, to counter these narratives, I think the government should much more focus on pre-bunking, because in Moldovan elections, everyone was expecting that the pro-Russian parties are going to win, but it has not happened. And I think it has not happened despite Russia heavily investing in TikTok, in social media propaganda, and so on. And I think one of the main reasons is that uniformly, most of the institutions in Moldova, government institutions, months ahead of the elections, they were going out there and they were saying, hey, you can expect that Russia is going to influence you exactly in this way, and they're going to say exactly this, this, and this. And then it really happened, and people were like, oh, but this is suspicious, right? So I think this was really a success. There was also EU involved, so I think EU, like the East Stratcom Task Force, should be way more involved across the elections in member states. But I think it's a success story, and Czech government, Czech officials, and civil society should learn from it. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Michal, for your analysis.
I'm sorry, Voldemar, if I can react maybe a bit.
Yeah, please.
Yes, I just wanted to add, thank you very much, Michael, that you mentioned the TikTok accounts. I just wanted to say that on the day of election, on the 3rd of October, Vox Media actually shared a huge analysis saying that TikTok actually took down almost 300 accounts which were pro-Russian, pushing narratives against the current government, against the system, against NATO and EU. So the pre-bunking or the debunking or kind of, controlling the narrative is working a bit. But as you said, it's not enough. I just wanted to say that this happened, and I think it's quite important for the discussion. And also, I just wanted to add, I agree with you that definitely regarding the funding of the strategic communication will go down. I would also like to add that what is kind of mistake of the still current government is that there were a lot of promises regarding the disinformation legislation made, and unfortunately those were never made. It kind of disappeared after maybe like 1 year within the government, and we can see that unfortunately it had an impact on the information space within the Czech Republic. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks.
I will lastly have one small comment that I forgot. Sorry, that one of the most important reasons actually we're facing this is that we do not have a national implementation of the Digital Services Act. So it's actually very hard to enforce anything when there is a problem with social media platforms.
Thanks. So it's great that we have a real conversation and discussion, but we also have to follow our agenda of our today's event. And
korotkou reakci udělal na
Just a brief response. I just wanted to compliment and react first. Aggressive campaign of Andrej Babiš, yes, it was very aggressive, much more aggressive than before. But I just want to tell you that he gave more moderate rhetorics in the end of campaign, and it worked somehow as well. What my colleague said already, so person without ideology, he can just say one thing, and in 2 weeks it's going to be different. For his voters, there's no discrepancy. The phone call to Zelensky, well, what he spoke of. The visit of Babiš to Kiev. In 2019, he was a prime minister. He came with large delegation of entrepreneurs from Czech Republic, and he had very positive impressions back then. And he reminded us that Ukraine, telling that Ukraine is a wonderful place for investors and entrepreneurs. And it's also a line I think he can repeat. If there is a profit for business, if there's benefit for business, he definitely can do it. Can go in that direction. And his coalition. The ammo initiative, he insists for this initiative to be shifted to NATO. This is something that he says quite often, because we're not against supporting Ukraine, and he's not against supporting Ukraine. For not to be funded by Czech Republic specifically. not by our government, but at the level of NATO. So this is his opinion. So this historical narrative, I don't agree, because in Czech Republic these are weak. Czechs basically know nothing about Banderivci or no. It's more a problem of Poland. In Czech Republic, yes. And the propaganda. After 2014, communists in Czech Republic tried to play with that narrative, but they didn't manage. So this negative image of Ukrainians previously because of the labor migrants from Ukraine. Yeah. I think this was the key image of Ukrainians in Czech Republic. I remember when I started coming to Ukraine like 15 years ago. Back then in Czech Republic, nobody knew about Ukraine, anything. That even this country existed, if that existed. People thought this was a part of Russia and that Ukrainian, nobody even knew that language existed. And historical narratives, just no, absolutely not. Nobody spoke of that. It was just because of the labor migrants and economic situation of Ukraine and the rest. Thank you so much, Michal. Okay, truly, it's an important thing. Knowledge about Ukraine. So if Czech citizens are aware about Ukraine and the ability to bring this knowledge, how we can bring this knowledge, why it's important? Obviously, it's important because according to statistics, approximately 500,000 of Ukrainians live in Czech Republic. And in the beginning of event, we already spoke of almost 400,000 Ukrainian refugees. And they are not just refugees, they are employed now in Czech Republic. They've been since 2022. Now, Miss Natalia Agarkova, I know you made a presentation as well. To discuss this issue. Speak about the electoral process and the Czech informational environment. How Ukrainian refugees are actually presented in that context. So, good afternoon. I will start with my gratitude. So we speak about Czech Republic, and we say that Czech Republic has been systemically and intensely supporting Ukraine since 2022. A week ago, Czech citizens managed to gather more than 13 million crowns for ammo to be delivered to Ukraine. You see it on the website in 48 hours. And you can see the type of ammo there. We have Czech representatives here with us. I'd like to express my personal gratitude, of course, to the whole country, to your people. Thank you for supporting us. It's extremely important for us, for Ukrainians, and it's important to speak how to retain the support, keep it after the election. The next slide. I'll stop at my personal impressions on elections. So we've already heard that Ukraine and Czech Republic, this is already a internal policy and external policy issue. So it's true. What issues have we heard during elections? Pensions, wages, childbirth support infrastructure. When in Czech Republic, in electoral process, they spoke of Ukraine, it was something really close for Czechs. Some painful issues. Jobs, childbirth support, safety in the streets. Something that is every single person is thinking about every day. So you can see in the slide some examples. You've seen that. Volodymyr showed that already. And you can see those examples. They're quite similar visually. Many Ukrainian flags, which is quite triggering and catchy. Also, electoral campaign mottos. They also refuted the message that Ukrainians were engaged in this robbery attempt. So this is quite a typical narrative. If something bad happens, well, Ukrainians must emerge there. So no jobs because of Ukrainians. Robberies, assaults because of Ukrainians. Yeah, so the current government had to refute all that quite often. So the number of Ukrainians, truly many of those are in Czech Republic. This is the country that accepted the largest number per capita. You can see the latest statistics in October 2025, 397,000, even more already. Only those people with temporary protection status. Of course, you can hear Ukrainian everywhere in the streets and transport. I always say that, well, when Ukrainians say, why Czechs are so mad? Because this is a typical response. If in Ukraine we had this inflow of foreigners. In Prague now we have 100,000 Ukrainians just residing. It's hard to imagine for one city. You know, imagine that inflow in Ukraine, what our reaction would be. So this reaction, negative, of Czech people, this is normal when you accept so many foreigners in your country. But how is it used by politicians? It's a different thing. And I want to give this example. Recently, I've talked to a Czech teacher, and she says, in my class, we have half Ukrainians, but we work well with them. They have good performance. I have no problems almost, yes. Well, some minor issues, but it's a normal adaptation process. No kids in schools. But she says, when I read social networks, I have an impression that this is not just bad, but very, very bad. So I just want to stress how politicians were able to use the Ukrainians' presence issue, that people emotionally respond even when they have positive perception of refugees in the country and adaptation. They still perceive the situation badly. She didn't vote for the current government, but for opposition. So why? Because she was emotional. She said, my class is just an exception. My school is an exception. But in general, Ukrainians behave badly and they don't adapt in Czech Republic. It seems to me that we should talk about, well, politicians found someone to blame in all the problems, Ukrainians. And it's well transformed into these electoral promises. I recall the survey of 2023, Czech survey, not only in Czech Republic, but in some EU states. And they spoke of Czech Republic, that Czech Republic has immunity to pro-Russian narratives, against pro-Russian narratives. And it guarantees Czech people that they will resist misinformation. But election of 2025, it showed us that if you have this immunity, it's not a guarantee of invincibility. And you've heard a lot about these narratives already. I'll tell you how these are transformed. One important should be underlined. If misinformation previously was pushing the idea that Ukraine is to blame in the war, Ukraine is a bad country, and the rest. Now, I think they will disseminate it in all EU states. The concept, Czech Republic or any other country must take care of itself only. This narrative mitigates disinformation, but it's still dangerous. It's a camouflage narrative that we do not need to help Ukraine, do not need to give ammo, but it's softer. And it's perceived better by the audience, voters in any country. Okay, social media. A lot was mentioned already, but I just want to tell you that how we characterize any kind of society. Age, segregation, educational level, territory of residence. In modern world, we need to disaggregate people, like how this group of community, where they take information from, what they consume. In Czech Republic, the electoral process showed us it's a trend. In other countries as well. It's important to understand that some Czech citizens consume traditional media, TV, radio, social media as well, verified content, but they're also Czech citizens living in their bubbles. They consume content in Facebook groups, TG channels, YouTube channels. In this alternative world, Ukraine is not a victim of aggression, but they push these ideas that we've heard of. Ukraine is corrupted, Ukrainians are fascists, Nazi, whatever. These two worlds, they don't intersect even. Yes, in Czech Republic, I like that Czechs who understand the dangers that we have now due to Russian propaganda and open aggression of Russia. It's important to communicate with Czechs, with this part of community living in bubbles. By the way, there's always a statement that only in this media you can get the truth. Yes, this is where you have all the info. Don't believe TV, don't trust radio. In Czech Republic, they try to reach this category of people. This is the film I guess you heard of. It's called Big Patriotic Trip, when 3 Czechs actually went to Ukraine. These Czechs were supporting Russia, and they went to Ukraine, and they've seen everything in their own eyes. Please, you should check this video, you should check this film, because it's very eye-opening. What's happening in hearts and minds of people who don't support Ukraine. It's an example how Czechs are trying to reach those people. If they fail or not, it's a different thing. There are such attempts. Okay, it's important also to, speaking about the such categories, meetings of current government with voters in various regions. That was a good attempt. Debates on Ukraine specifically, where people were coming who consume also the alternative media, and asked about Ukraine. So this discussion is important, and it seems to me this can be used by other countries with upcoming elections, and where they will have different processes related to Russian disinformation. When we speak about social media, I will not stop at this. Which social media used and how? But this is still the key tool of impact. Why these are important? The information goes very fast, and I picked this example. You can see the post from Reichel. We mentioned him. Here presents the pro-party. Pro-Russian narratives in Czech Republic. In this post, it says that when Ukraine allowed young men to leave the country from 18 to 22, Czechs, in Czech Republic, there was a huge radical inflow of Ukrainians. Yes, it's a fact. But then there's open manipulation, saying that that Ukrainians are not fleeing from Russians, but they're fleeing from Zelensky. This is open manipulation with voters' minds. All these narratives are clear. In red, you can see, so this post was put more than a week ago. In an hour, more than 1,000 of shares in Facebook. More than 1,000 of comments, and 6.5 thousand of response. So this is super fast. Minimum investment, maximum result. How to fight this? Well, I don't know. We need to have a separate discussion. This is a very important thing when we speak about distribution. Emotionally loaded posts, these go super fast. When they give only facts, it actually even gets another response, but the degree of intensity goes up in discussion. During the election, there was a stream organized by SPD and other parties with anti-Ukrainian rhetorics. 1 hour of conversation, 1 hour of truth. They called it, but 1 hour of manipulations it was, truly. Next week, the Minister of Agriculture responded to it, Marek Wyborny. You can see the infographics he gave. So it tells that Ukrainians are not dangerous for Czechs. And criminality rate is not going up. The blue bar, 0.65%, yeah? Only. These are the crimes where Ukrainians committed, and even Slovaks, more Slovaks in the statistics. So it looks like, okay, refuting is important. It's important to refute those manipulations, those distributed by anti-Ukrainian politicians. But at that moment, our team checked the comments under the post of Mr. Wyborny. This was for Czechs as a cold shower, you know? Well, not calming, but raising the degree of intensity. What to do with that? I heard the idea of Czech colleagues maybe adding more emotions to facts. I don't know if this may work, but there's such an idea. In the next slide. We all understand that disinformation is changing the public opinion, and it can actually change, it may have political consequences of what my colleagues spoke about. I cannot guarantee what's going to happen in Czech society, but I think that we'll have changes. Even when Mr. Babiš, even if Mr. Babiš didn't have that aggressive rhetorics and didn't speak aggressively about Ukraine, but with anti-Ukrainian allies, let's say, he will have to reach compromise. Which compromise will be that? How negative it will be for us? If the format of assistance changes, I still think it's going to happen. But anyway, forecasting, it's quite hard. I'd like to focus also on this, that a year ago, I talked to Czech colleagues. If they notice any... If the Russian propaganda is systemic, if they notice this, how they work with this rhetorics. I heard this, like, please, just you should ignore them. These are like marginal groups. And I was somehow bothered with that. Ukrainians already have this experience when you were laughing with at absurd statements given by Russians. When voters, year by year, are told, are given some absurd ideas, eventually these ideas are normalized and perceived not as absurd. During this electoral campaign, a lot was spoken. So many messages, not just against Ukraine, but also European Union. It seems to me that we should work with this audience and avoid the deepening of these anti-European narratives. We may not see the consequences today, but soon Not at next election, but soon will have consequences. Okay, the next slide. Czech society is resisting. I gave only 2 examples. I could have talked for hours about what Czech Republic is doing for Ukrainians. It's really important to show Czechs, ever Czechs, that it's really important for the Czech Republic itself, this assistance to Ukraine. So you can see this visualization of memory. They're showing something that happened in Prague. And they are showing what actually may potentially happen if war comes to Czech Republic. And this is a pain for Czechs. I've seen people standing at city lights, and I saw that these are just Czech landscapes. People were stopping and discussing, like, what was happening, if this is some advertising. No, it actually... It touches people. When you work with audience, it always works. It's important to have this as systemic work. And another example. The requirement from an NGO to bring Ukrainian flag to the museum building. You've heard those debates. In Czech Republic, they're trying to take these off. They will try to take these off, but and the current government said that this is not a political step, but this is a symbol of supporting the country fighting for its independence. And in this case, an active campaign on bringing the flag back, Ukrainian flag back. Thank you so much. If you have any questions. So we started working, we work not only for Ukrainians now, but for Czechs also. With the Ukrainian editorials in Slovakia and Poland, we launched a big project on fighting the dissemination of disinformation against Ukraine. We made videos not only in Ukrainian, but also translating in Czech. I want to tell you that these videos, we told simple things like Zelensky didn't buy the part of Czech Republic. We were refuting those fakes. Yes, in these videos, there were 15,000 views, 8,000 views, and it seems to me that this was really important, where we could bring our small contribution to minimize this degree of negative attitude to Ukraine. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Natalia. Okay, I think that question-answer session, because we're losing time, it's almost 2 hours. We now need to give a chance to the rest of speakers. Okay, if you have questions, please address it virtually to our group, please, because we are out of time completely. We have to finish. We're out of time completely, so we are closer to the finish line. We have to stick to time anyway. Let's focus on the last topic that we have. Quite often we heard this, so social networks and media. When we spoke of the relevance for the countries with upcoming elections, well, Ukraine is also one of those countries with potential upcoming elections. Currently, we cannot forecast when, but anyway, Russia will try to interfere in our electoral process via social media. Quite often we talk about it on this stage and in various publications of our group. So I pass the floor to Vladislav Moshkivsky. Vladislav, what are your impressions of social media component in Czech elections? Can Ukraine take something out of that, some lessons we can learn? Some nuances? And what our group noted, active use of AI technology also, maybe you'll give some feedback. Thank you so much. Well, first of all, my gratitude as well to Czech people. We do respect your choice, whatever the choice is. I would love to first tell you about social media, especially TikTok. Since the moment when TikTok was so underappreciated, now, thanks to TikTok, thanks to this platform, you can win the election. That's evolution. We've seen that in Romania, where Georgescu and his campaign was built around TikTok. Speaking of Czech election, we've seen how Russia was acting in two dimensions. Thanks to TikTok, first, they were aiming at discreditation of Ukrainian refugees, creating this negative portrayal, and then use this as a foundation for their political actors in Czech Republic and the narrative. Second dimension, that was expanding the informational bubble for Czechs. SPD and Stachila, for example, saying that, okay, we picked these two political parties or groups, let's say, it will not be a secret for anyone. It was pretty clear even before that ANO, Babiš's party ANO, will get many votes, many places in the parliament, and the key resistance power focused on pushing at least the Chilean SPD to make Czech parliament more, let's say, fragmented at some point. And I would love to note that they managed at some extent. Thanks to a TikTok algorithm, they created an impression that when you scroll after SPD video or Stachila video, you also had some videos on discrediting refugees, and it strengthened the impression, negative impression towards Ukraine or Ukrainian people staying in Czech Republic, and to strengthen impression, bring you closer to these political groups. And somehow maybe to discredit the Petr Fiala's movement, for example. They had these videos as well. It means that Russia even now is preparing the future election in Czechia, in Czech Republic, future presidential election. They foresee that we'll have it in 2028, but we'll see how it goes. Russia now continues preparing for the future election. We can see that in Czech informational space, even after parliamentary election in October, they started actively engaging to making certain bubbles around SPD, Stachila, and other groups like ANO to increase the possibility of winning, for their actors to win a presidential election. On the Ukrainian factor, I'd like to know that TikTok is not a negative thing per se. This platform can be used also to fight and counter this bubble that is created to imitate the support. In Facebook, we've seen it in the slide. We've seen how in Facebook post took 1.5 thousand reposts and thousands of comments. The question is if these are not from bots, if this is relevant, but if these were actual Czech people, but still, in social media, you can create bots, so somehow manipulate algorithms to push any posts in Facebook and TikTok. This is again about impact, how you can influence the voters' behavior. This is one of the lessons for future electoral process in Ukraine in particular, because social network element and TikTok in particular, we can see that it will play its role in future election, because Russia, while we still have the war ongoing with Russia here, Russia is training. Russia is using European elections to train as pilots. They're experimenting. They may fail, they may win somewhere, but there will be a huge fight, electoral fight in Ukraine someday. But also Czech Republic presidential election. It still will be there. And of course, Ukrainian election, that definitely is going to be harsh. We can see that they are preparing an internet. They are ready to spend huge money. In Moldova, they spent $150 million. Like for nothing, they lost. They wasted the money. But they will learn the lessons and they will invest more to affect any other European election. So there's a question. So there's an issue. We need to learn how to counteract future Russian interventions. But every European state has to learn that. Okay, thank you. We're moving forward. We're already finishing, almost finishing. Just small feedback from our group, from Mikita Kuzmenko, from my colleague, on how Russia interpreted the Czech events with elections. I mean, in their TG channels, pro-Kremlin, pro-Russian, because it actually affects the audience. Staying specifically in Czech Republic, Belarusians, Ukrainians, other nationalities, which unfortunately are in Russian informational space so far, they've been. So we have to take this into account as well. And now I'm addressing this to, again, as I said, Mikita. Mikita, tell us, what are the key messages, what Russia is pushing via its channels and Telegram? What were they pushing in the info space? Thank you, Volodymyr. I understand that we have to leave already, so I will be super fast. And the interpreter is really tired. Okay, so putting it generally, Russian propaganda, especially in Telegram and with Z speakers like the shithead Solovyov or Amen Hasparan. So they actually were very positive about the results in all Z channels. They were praising Ano and Babiš. He is called in Russian TG channels, I'm quoting, Hasparan says, he is not a pro-Russian. He's not a pro-Kremlin. He's pro-Czech. He is a pro-national. Yeah, so his rhetorics, where we hear, Babiš's rhetorics, some skepticism on Ukraine's EU accession, we hear it there, and if we should continue delivering the military aid to Ukraine, well, it's taken by Russian propaganda instantly, and they raise it to the top level. They disseminate it, and Z channels say, whoa, finally, in Europe, these real men started winning in Europe, those who think about Europe first, and not about some countries like Ukraine, not serving any interests like American, Brussels, or European, but their interests. Fico, they speak of, Orban, of course, and now in this team, they will add Babiš, the dream team. So speaking of the election representation, in Russian propaganda, they also spoke that Czech Republic already warns about Russian interference potentially, and they try to safeguard themselves at some point. Protect themselves from any allegations. And some speakers were even giving forecasts that Czech Republic may go under Romanian scenario when there will be no winner, recognized winner, and they will not recognize the election result. But the result, for Russia, this result, as they perceive it as favorable. So there were no, like with Moldova, there were no lamentations and accusations and nothing like that from Russia. So we can say that the Russian interference on election day, these were minimal, as they were okay with the result. And the way the election presented, again, in very positive tone, and we can understand it from the rhetorics of TG channels and the Russian speakers. Russian expect that in future, Czech Republic and Babiš will move in that direction. Something that they were promising, that he was promising. So These are the key moments on Russian propaganda, how they presented the Czech election and Czech electoral winner. Unfortunately, we are super out of time, ladies and gentlemen. This was very vivid, very interactive, and we've heard a lot of opinions today. It was so rich and intense, and it just tells us that there is so much interest from Ukrainian analysts to it, and our Czech colleagues are super interested in that. And I think that in future, of course, we will keep our fingers on the pulse, both of us, Czechs and Ukrainians. I think that, of course, we should develop Ukrainian analytics and, of course, take Czech lessons on board and from other countries to understand better all the processes that are taking place in Europe, in some European states specifically, and this will give us a chance to counteract Russian disinformation better and understand eventually why certain trends are circulating in political spaces. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, my immense gratitude to our interpreter, of course, and to all the speakers, to all our panelists, both offline and online, and all the questions that we didn't get today. We will address it in the online format. Don't worry, to our speakers, because this is again about networking. It's about cooperation, which is not limited to this event, of course. And building an expert community is a super important component of building the horizontal connections when it comes to civic society. Alrighty then. Thank you for actually listening to us. Have a very safe evening, all of us, and some more events to go. Thank you.